I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome to Rotary Club of Salem. It's wonderful to have you all here today. I'm thrilled to be here. My name is Tammy Denny. I have the pleasure and privilege of serving as your president in this, our 100th year. It is Wednesday, June 10th, and we'll get our program underway. So I'm so happy to see all of your faces. Thank you for your participation in this virtual realm. Before we move along too far, I want to be sure and welcome our guest. Our first guest, Jill Tucker, is also a president of Salem Club. And Jill, it's the South Salem Club, correct?
Yep, president of the South Salem Rotary Club.
Okay,
hey,
so
everyone.
President Jill is with us today. Welcome, President Jill. Thanks for being here. And then also, Brenna Baucom, you have a guest?
I do. A guest, but a stranger to no one. Mary Way has joined us here today. Thanks for coming, Mary. As much as you can.
Yeah. Welcome, Mary Way, our past president. We love you. Welcome, and thanks for being here today. And Mark Wolf, you have a guest.
Yes, I have a guest today, Dylan Schechtel. Dylan was an outbound exchange student from the Dalles Club in 2011, 2012, the same year that we sent Antonia Decker. She's involved in the kind of alumni group of the exchange students and involved in our district Rotary Committee. She is with Willamette University admissions, and she's joining us today.
Excellent. Welcome, Dylan. We're happy to have you here with us today. Thank you so much. Thanks, Mark. All right, so moving on, Rick Galpo, you have invocation, words of inspiration?
I do. So one of the things I really appreciated amongst all the issues around George Floyd and the protest is this call to lift up the voices of people of color and be an amplifier, and specifically to help continue other people's messages. So this is from George Floyd's funeral, Reverend Al Sharpton. So there have been protests all over the world. Some have looted and done things, and none of us in this family condone looting or violence. The things I want us to be real cognitive of, there's a difference between those calling for peace and those calling for quiet. Some of you all don't want peace, you just want quiet. The overwhelming majority of people marching wasn't breaking windows, they were trying to break barriers. You're sitting now trying to figure out how to stop the protest rather than how to stop the brutality. The problem is, too many of us have been walking by the Eric Gardners, been walking by the Trayvon Martins, been walking by the Arbery's, been walking by, and now we have stopped for George Floyd. And I'm in Houston today because I don't want nobody to call me a passerby. All of us are here today because we're not passerbyers. My Rotary friends, let's pray. We pray that we are on the side of peace, not quiet. We pray that we are not passerbyers. We pray that we are on the side of equity for all in our community. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Rick. Appreciate that. And now you have a dual role today, so we can move right into bell ringers, please, sir.
All right. We have one bell ringer prepared, Dave Duckelman. Dave Duckelman is ringing the bell for his daughter, Kelsey, who formally graduated from Silverton High School on Thursday. Her last day of class was March 13th. Hats off to the administration staff and some amazing parent volunteers who pulled off a social distancing ceremony Thursday evening. We all received assigned parking spaces that were socially distanced, and the ceremony was live streamed so we could watch from our cars. When the time came, we drove up, dropped off Kelsey so she could walk social distance from her classmates across the stage and receive her diploma. I had my doubts, but the whole process was amazing and well organized, and the whole ceremony was only about 2 hours long. Way to go, Silverton. Cheers to Kelsey Duckelman and the class of 2020. Ring the bell. So that is the only bell
looks-
ringers
it looks
that
like
were
Jane-
prepared.
Looks like Jane Griggs raised her hand. Jane, did you raise your hand for a bell ringer?
I did.
Okay.
I'd like to ring the bell for Sarah Leroy. A few nights ago on Channel 8, at the 5 o'clock news, they featured Sarah and her work as a principal and the senior graduating class of 2020. So for media coverage, it was about a 3-minute segment, which was pretty substantial. So I'm ringing the bell for her.
Way to go. Okay. And let's see, 2 other participants have raised their hand for a bell ringer. So let's see, Trisha?
Hi, everyone. I have 2 bell ringers today that I will pay for later this afternoon. The first one is I'm ringing the bell for COVID weddings and for officially changing my last name. Last week, we had our wedding plans detoured by COVID in March, and we decided to move forward and had it out at the family farm and did social distancing and Zoomed people in, but it was a lot of fun. So ringing the bell for changing last names and everyone else who has gone forward with their wedding plans or are altering them and just dealing with all that fun stuff. So.
And that's 2 bell ringers, right, Trisha?
1, because I have another one.
Okay.
Yeah. The second one that I have is for the Salem Police Department. I believe that they are doing a fantastic job in responding to today's challenges that are multifaceted, right? Between COVID and addressing homelessness in the downtown area specifically, and then also protests that are peaceful and otherwise. And as a person of color in a family that has multiple nationalities coming into it in a melting pot, I just really want to publicly say that I appreciate the work that they're doing and the positive interactions that we have always had with Salem PD. That is not the case with other police departments, but Salem PD has always been fantastic, and I fully support them and want to say thank you to them.
Excellent. Thank you. Do we have any other bell ringers? I don't see any other hands going up in the participant box, but just start talking if you wanted to ring the bell. Okay. Hearing none, seeing none. Am I missing anybody? Don't want to move too fast, but I don't want to overlook you either. Okay. I don't see anyone physically raising their hand, so in case they don't feel comfortable going to the participant box. All righty. So moving along then, thank you so much for the bell ringers. Thank you, Rick, for managing both of those tasks today for our club. I appreciate it. And now to Steve Martin for our final centennial moment for this year in our celebrating our 100 years since our charter. So Steve, take it away.
Well, just as a reminder, our district has a distinction of being one of 3 clubs that celebrated their centennial this year: Pendleton, Astoria, and of course, our club, Salem. So as Tammy indicated, this will be the final centennial minutes of our celebration. So let me share with you a few of the historical items of interest that did not fit into the other centennial minutes. So here we go. In our 100-year history, we have met regularly at only 4 locations. Well, 5 if you count the virtual meetings. The Marion Hotel for 50 years, which you can see directly behind me. The Black Angus Restaurant, which no longer exists. The Mission Mill Museum, and the Salem Convention Center, which is located pretty much where the Marion Hotel site was. Our 1927 membership roster lists a narcotics committee. However, no further information, pro or con, could be found regarding the purpose of this committee. During World War II, Salem Rotarians serving in the military, wherever they were stationed, received a copy of the weekly club bulletin. In the 100-year history of our club, there have only been 4 of our members who served as district governors while members of our club. 1932, William McGilchrist. 1946, Ivan Stewart. 1958, Joseph Dodd. And 2017, Renee Campbell. In the 1930s, our club went on record as favoring the removal of highway advertising signs in the Salem area, and our club voted to remove its own signs at the 3 main entrances to the city. In the 1930s, our club invited both high school and Willamette College students to attend club meetings as our guests. 1961, the loose leaf club roster was introduced and featured a separate sheet for each member with their photograph and all their Rotary information. 1964, our club hosted the president of Rotary International, Carl Miller. Carl Miller was also the brother-in-law of our own Rotarian, Bill Perry. On March 2nd, 1966, after 3 separate tries, perfect attendance of all our members for one club meeting was finally achieved. At a meeting in 1966, Rotarians were surprised to see Miss America, Mary Ann Mobley of Brandon, Mississippi, walk into the meeting. She was escorted by Rotarian Jerry Frank. It was noted that Miss America commended our Rotary Club for its scholarship program and efforts in international peace. 1969, 2 past presidents, Bill Bailey and Percy Jock Bryden, teamed up once a month to recognize members who had birthdays during that month. The format included good humor, some roasting, and a special dessert for members. By the way, I believe that Rotarian Percy Jock Bryden was the uncle of our own Rotarian Mark Wolf, sitting right over there in square number 14. In 1979, when the 911 emergency call system was implemented in Marion County, our club funded small Call 911 emergency stickers, which were placed on every household telephone in the county. 1987, Kim Arbuckle became the first 3rd-generation president of our club. 1987, Rotary International finally welcomed women into membership. Our club's first women members, all inducted on the same day, by the way, were Ruth Johnson, Deputy Administrator for Marion County Health, Judy Patterson, Principal, North Salem High School, Carol Toomey, Capital Health Group Insurance. 1994 was remembered as our club's 75th anniversary. A new club banner was designed for that celebration, which I believe was spearheaded by Rotarian Ron Rebel. 1996-97, Ellen Wyatt served as the first women president of our club. At that time, our club only had 7 women members. And now you definitely know the rest of the story. Good day.
Thank you, Steve. Woo! Thank you, Steve, so much for putting our history into those moments. I know you and Ron Rebel worked closely on that, and we really appreciate all of that time. Members, if you haven't seen in the e-blast, we have put all of the links in there, and then Steve will add this one. So there'll be a full catalog of links that you can go to read all of our centennial moments. So thank you, Steve. Thank you for your commitment to helping us revisit our past and helping us as we launch into our next 100 years. So thank you again. Appreciate you. Thank you, sir. Okay, and now club announcements. Before I turn it over to Lauren Gutierrez with Red Badge update, I want to let everyone know that you have received, or should have received by now, a second dues update. We need to, Chuck Swank needs to hear from every member if you are rejoining or if you intend to not rejoin, because we need to have our numbers accurate for July 1st. So we need to hear from you by Monday the 15th so that we can get our numbers in order and begin calling down folks we haven't heard from. So if you are participating in the weekly meetings, please don't make us put you on that list. Please just reach out to Chuck, let him know that you're renewing, what the status of that renewal is, and we'll keep you in the count because you will be then counted as part of our dues to Rotary International and to district. So please help us keep our accounting straight, and please make contact with Chuck right away. Thank you for doing that. And now, Lauren, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see everybody's faces. I am Lauren Gutierrez with the Salem Health Hospitals and Clinics, representing our Blue Badge program today. We noticed one of the kind of feedback that we've gotten is that there are fewer opportunities to do some of the Blue Badge items of tasks with these new Zoom meetings, the virtual meetings. So we decided to put together a greeting session. So one of the requirements that is a must do is that all of our new members must greet people. So what we're going to do today is, I think Kelsey's not here, so we're going to start with Stephen Godo, and then we're going to go to Marilyn Schuster, two of our red badgers who are working towards their blue badge, and they're going to give you a quick introduction. They're going to give you their name and their professional title and the organization they represent, and then they're going to let you know their favorite place to travel, the name and location of their high school, and a fact that most people don't know about them, and they've gotten the choice of whether they want to explain it or not. So every month or every meeting, we're going to have new members give this little intro. It'll be really quick, but it just gives us a way to kind of get their face in front of us and give a little bit of information, just like they would do if they were greeting you. So to start us off, let's start with Stephen.
Hi, my name is Stephen Godo. I'm a financial advisor with alumni here in Albany. Generally, when we go traveling, my wife and I, we have a place that we go to in Kona, in Honolulu. I'm originally from Honolulu, so it's kind of, well, we go to a place in Kona, but I'm from Honolulu. Yeah, they're close enough anyway. So I went to South Salem High School, and we moved from Honolulu about 20 years ago now. My mom was a member of this club for a really long time, and she joined Rotary originally because I was an exchange student from the Salem Sunrise Club. Since then, I've been a Rotarian for most of my adult life, and for a really, really brief period, I was the youngest Rotarian in the district. But unfortunately, like youth, it was relatively short-lived. But since then, we've had plenty of new, younger members join, and it's always been really nice.
Thank you, Stephen.
Awesome. Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, go ahead. We'll go to Marilyn next.
Okay, I'm Marilyn Schuster, and I am retired, but I did work in safety and health most of my career with both Federal OSHA and Oregon OSHA. In addition to being retired, I also am president of the Yokoti Women Farmers, a nonprofit that I started over 10 years ago now in Ghana. So one of the places that I, of course, most enjoy going is Ghana, not because it's a fabulous vacation spot, but because of the people there. I love the people. And everywhere that I like to travel, and I have actually, after last week's meeting where Ron was talking about that they'd been to 37 countries, I totaled up mine and I've been to 31 countries. So I like to travel a lot, but generally I like to go to places where it's all about the people and being near the people. So that's why I really enjoyed, for example, the Sri Lankan trip that I went on with Rotary Exchange last year. I went to Hillsborough High School. I grew up near Shoals on a 40-acre farm and went to Hillsborough High School. And the fact, I don't know if this is really a fact, but it was interesting in Rick's, he talked about people not being passersby. And I think I've always never been a passerby, because back in 1985, when I lived and worked in Washington, D.C., I was part of the Ribbon Project, where people from all over the world, tens of thousands of people from all over the world, created, sewed, knitted, whatever, created these fabric panels, and we sewed them all together, and it went for over 10 miles, and we walked around the Pentagon, around the White House, around the Capitol, to say that we simply could not bear to think of what would be lost forever in a nuclear war. So I was very active in peacekeeping efforts for much of my life.
Wonderful. Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you, Stephen. Great job, Lauren, for coordinating. Any closing remarks, Lauren?
Yeah, just one more shout out to all the new members. I sent out a couple emails about this and about Blue Badge in general. So if you aren't getting them, or if you haven't responded to me, give me a shout. My number's available on DocDB and everywhere else probably. So let me know, and we'll do this every week. If the membership has an idea of a way to improve this, I would love to hear it. Again, just trying to use a couple of minutes to get a little bit of FaceTime, a little bit of info, so we have something to talk about. So I'd love some input. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Lauren. Appreciate it. Thank you for an active membership committee. That's really helpful for everyone. So thank you so much. Okay, now we will move into our program. Renee Campbell is our program chair. So Renee, I'll turn it over to you to introduce our speaker.
Thank you very much, President Tammy. And I have asked a virtual head table to join us today, and I'd like to introduce those people to you and share with you their connection with this program today. Howard Bauman, retired gastroenterologist. I love saying that, Howard. He chairs our International Service Committee, and which led to our club's financial participation in the global grant that we will hear about today. Deb Patterson is the pastor of the Smyrna United Methodist Church in Canby, and by the way, just recently won her party's nomination as candidate for Senate District 20. Erin's project is in the area of focus for peace. Jane Downing, I didn't see Jane. Are you here, Jane?
Yes.
If not, she's, but we're going to recognize her anyway. Director of the Center for Hope and Safety, and we heard from her a couple of weeks ago how she deals every day with the local issues of violence against women. And then last but not least, not necessarily at the head table, but if you are a donor to the Rotary Foundation, I'd like to thank you. Your gifts to TRF provide the matching funds for the global grants, such as the one that we will hear about today. Please welcome our head table. So, like Rick, I've been watching the news this week, and we've heard so many messages reminding us that it is time to treat all people with dignity and respect. And one of the messages that I heard struck me particularly in light of this program today. Actor John Boyega spoke these words to a crowd in London, quote, "This message is specifically for Black men. Black men, we need to take care of our Black women. They are our hearts. They are our future. We cannot demonize our own," unquote. In her book, The Moment of Lift by Melinda Gates, she states this truth for all women and backs it up with data and experiences that when we lift up our women, we lift up the whole community. And if you haven't had the opportunity, I would encourage you to read her book. So Erin Thomas is with us today. She was part of the inaugural graduating class of the Rotary Peace Fellows, and she received her MA in Peace and Conflict Resolution from the Universidad del Salvador in Buenos Aires, Argentina. She's the Director of Strategic Partnerships for Every Woman Treaty, an organization that's dedicated to creating opportunity for a life free from all forms of violence for every woman and girl everywhere. Erin co-founded the Rotarian Action Group for Peace right here in Oregon, and she served as its executive director for 3 years. She was on the Sao Paulo Peace Symposium Planning Committee for the Rotary Convention. She served as the alumni representative for the Rotary Peace Center's Future Planning Committee in 2016-18. She and her husband live in Portland with their 2 children, and she's a member of the Rotary Club of Albina. Our club is one of 12 clubs inside and outside our district participating in a global grant that's led by Erin and Laura Tilrico from the Newberg Club. We're going to hear about a $122,000 grant that will train women's rights leaders to develop advocacy, communications, and leadership skills, and build a network to prevent and redress violence against women in Nepal. Please welcome Erin Thomas.
Thank you so much, Renee. Thank you so much for having me, inviting me. And, you know, an aside on my relationship with Renee is this is my first ever global grant, the Nepal grant, which your club has so graciously partnered with us on, and that I'm going to tell you about today. But learning the global grant system is no small feat. And so I have been attending Renee's International Service Committee meetings, and this is how you become a Rotarian. You learn your chops by joining others and hearing about all the ins and outs of what people have accomplished across the globe with these global grants. So thank you, Renee. I was really looking forward to joining you in person today. My parents grew up in Salem. My mom lived on Peck Avenue in Southeast, and my dad lived on Madrona and 12th. They were about a block away from each other. And I was going to drag some of my cousins, not drag, but they're in their 30s, they're young career professionals in Salem, and they ought to get involved in Rotary. So I'll look forward to doing that, inviting them to one of your club meetings and visiting in person someday after this pandemic has resolved itself and we can get our vaccinations and get back together. So speaking of the pandemic, I put a really brief introduction in at the beginning of the meeting that the Rotary Peace Fellow Alumni Association is doing all sorts of things. And if you're interested in the peace area of focus, I included the link. It's just rpfaa.org, and we're having a big cyber conference, and we'd love, we're talking about violence against women, and really we have profound speakers on anti-racism and bringing it into our clubs and our lives and other things, and it's being supported at every level within Rotary. So I appreciate that. I'm just going to start out by talking to you about this global grant and why we're doing the work we're doing. While I'm doing that, I'm going to put some slides in the chat box, and you should feel free, and I put it there, it doesn't show up as a link, but you could copy and paste it. You should feel free to flip through that if you'd like. It has some pictures and some images, and I don't mind at all that some people do better listening while having something to look at. And it's harder, as you know, from all of our vast Zoom experience after these few months, that it's harder to do both things as a speaker. So I might refer to the slideshow again later on, but if not, feel free to look through it as you go, as we talk. What I really hope today is that we'll leave here understanding two things. One, why do I believe, and why does Every Woman Treaty, my organization, believe that within a few years we'll have a global treaty addressing and redressing violence against women and girls? And how is Rotary already involved, both through this global grants and in other ways? Because Rotary is a powerful partner in this work. So to set the stage and explain a little bit about what we're talking about addressing, according to the United Nations, 35% of women will experience violence in their lifetimes, most of which from their intimate partner. So 35% of women is the bare minimum. We're talking about women, statistics that we know, statistics that are reported on. When we talk about 1 in 3 women, we are not talking about the other forms of violence that also wreak havoc on women's lives. We're not talking about trafficking. We're not talking about female genital mutilation. We're not talking about child marriage. When we're talking about 1 in 3 women experience violence, we're talking about raped, beaten, killed. And that is something that from Afghanistan to Salem, Oregon, to Malaysia, wherever in the globe, there is universal agreement that raped, beaten, killed should not be allowed. Yet we don't have the laws in place to make that actually a reality for women. Women are not safe across the globe. And so right now, due to the coronavirus pandemic, we're seeing it even more so than ever, right? In some countries, the calls to domestic help hotlines have spiked. There's a massive amount of calls, people looking for shelter. There's a lot more texts too, because people don't have the freedom to speak or to go to a shelter. However, shelters are also closing. It's happening in Salem, it's happening in Portland because of the virus, it's very difficult to keep shelters open. We're moving to hotel models, all different things. But in a lot of countries, take Kenya, for example, women's shelters and domestic violence work is not seen as essential. So during the pandemic, only essential work could go forward. That meant all shelters, all hotlines, everything was shut down. And so the only redress that a woman had was literally doctors, nurses, judges, and police were sheltering women in their homes in Kenya, because the lockdown is still going on there in pretty harsh terms. So the pandemic has really highlighted to us that this is a global pandemic within the pandemic, and that we need, governments are really getting it. They're really understanding the numbers that they're facing on this issue and ready to dialogue. And so we will emerge from this pandemic with a broader coalition than we entered with. And it's sad that it took something like this, but we really have a lot of traction with national government leaders right now. That makes us very hopeful that we can get to this treaty. What else makes us hopeful that we can get to a treaty? The world has rallied together on various issues. I think that a lot of us remember a time with no seatbelts, right? My brother and my mom had a blue VW Bug. I grew up in Tumalo, Oregon, and we just rolled around the back seats. There was no seatbelt law. It wasn't required. There wasn't child safety, right? There was a time in many people's lives where hamburger wrappers could be thrown right out the window. It wasn't until Lady Bird Johnson and her, the legislation, the laws that she changed in America, changed that scenario. Another example is, that I want to talk about is the tobacco treaty, something that gives us really a huge amount of hope that we can bring this forward. We were at a time in our lifetimes where smoking was people's right. You could smoke on airplanes, you could smoke in restaurants and bars, you could smoke in most places. And it wasn't, the laws were changed. It was the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control is a treaty that went through the United Nations, the first ever treaty that went through the World Health Organization. And it changed the laws, but what it did that gives us the most hope for changing the situation for women's safety is it changed the global norm. It is no longer a norm that you have a right to smoke anywhere. It is now a norm that you have a right to fresh air, and you have to ask if you can smoke. And so even in countries where tobacco use is still much more prevalent, the norm has shifted, not just the laws, but also the norm, the way people view it. And this is what we need for women's safety. Another treaty that gives us a great deal of hope is the landmine ban treaty. And it's actually very instructive. It's our blueprint. It was the first treaty that was brought forward by NGOs. Treaties aren't created by NGOs. Individuals like me, treaties are created by nations. A nation has to come to the United Nations and say, we are going to create a treaty, and then bring other nations on as signatories. And there's a whole lot of consultation and negotiation that happens within that. So what happened with the landmine ban treaty is approximately 25,000 people a year were being hurt and killed and maimed by landmines. And Canada went to meeting after meeting and said, enough is enough. We've come and year after year, there's no teeth, there's no funding. The same number of people are being killed annually, and they walked out. 7 other nations walked out with them. And they went to the NGOs that had been working on this issue, and they said, what is draft 0 of a treaty? What is a treaty that includes survivors, that includes communities that are affected, right? And that is how the landmine treaty came about. And that is exactly how we're approaching the treaty to ban violence against women and girls. Violence, I mean, the numbers are just staggering. Violence wounds or kills more than 2.5 million women a year. Violent costs, and there was another number that I skipped over, and that's the problem with looking at your notes. You can't always find things, but Violence against women is 100 times more deadly than landmines, and it is also 4 times more costly than tobacco use was to the world economy. So if we can ban landmines and if we can regulate tobacco, we can do this. We know that. What we've been doing is for 6 years, we've been working through the Carr School of Human Rights at Harvard to establish national coalitions. We have national coalitions in 128 countries right now. And what our coalitions jointly have, we've done consultations with law schools on every continent. We have experts in every area of women's safety, widowhood rights, child marriage. Every aspect has been involved in the consultation. And what is needed for a treaty to be successful? Because when Canada walks out, Norway walks out, Nepal, based on this grant, will be a part of calling for the treaty for sure. We have a lot of traction in Nepal, and we need to make sure that some core tenets are there. One, change the laws. Every country in the world has laws that can be changed. Some countries have laws that protect violence, so laws that have to be thrown out. Other countries have laws that are not implemented. In the United States, we have 18 states where marital rape is not illegal. So there's no country in the world that doesn't have gaps in their law. So the number one thing in a treaty that we're asking for is change the laws, get rid of the bad ones, and have universal agreement on what is the good one that we all need. Number 2, training and accountability. The same people that are taking in women in Kenya, nurses, doctors, judges, police, they need to be trained. They need to understand the rights and how to implement them when survivors come to them asking for redress. Number 3, something that Rotary does well already and can do even more of, education. So educating our children from a very young age about violence, racism, unequal inclusion of women, just being specific about the things, calling out the things that are happening and letting young children know that we see them and they're not okay. That education is a huge part of what will end violence against women and girls. Number 4 is the services for survivors. So if you manage to report, if you manage to get to the hospital to get help, you may need services. You may need housing services. I see that that somebody posted in the chat that your shelter has remained open, which is great. I know several of ours in Portland haven't, and we've moved to a hotel model. But we need those services, right? We need the hotlines. We need them to be funded, and we need them to lead people to the services they need. And the last one is fund it. The landmine ban issue, before the treaty, it was about $10 million a year. They struggled to pull in funding, and $10 million a year, all it did was things like signage and, helping like close off areas versus demining and eradicating landmines. When the treaty was signed in 2005, the sustained level of funding has never dipped below 400 million. From 10 million to 400 million, donor governments came to the table and said, let's do this. If we're going to actually do this treaty, we need to fund it so that we demine, and countries have to commit to not creating more landmines. So what about countries like the United States? We don't always participate in treaties. We rarely participate in treaties. Well, we cede to treaties. It's embarrassing when we don't. And so what did we do? We stopped distributing landmines immediately when the treaty went into enactment. So maybe we're not a signatory, but we are holding ourselves to the terms of that treaty, and that's what we hope for with our treaty as well. So where does a partnership with Rotary and Rotarians come in? To be clear, it's not a polio type partnership. It's not as easy. And polio hasn't been easy, believe me, as a Rotarian, I know. But it's not as easy to treat it, right? It's not as clear cut. And so what we looked at, and I'm really grateful for Laura Tilrico in the Newberg Club, who asked me to speak about Every Woman Treaty at her club. And afterwards, she said to me, what is the number one thing that will change, change the situation for women, create safety, and actually build peace in a country. And the number one thing as a peace scholar, we've looked at so many indicators, is the existence of an autonomous women's rights movement. If there is an autonomous women's rights movement in your country, that it is a more significant factor for peace than the number of women in parliament, the number of women in the formal and informal job sectors. That number is incredibly strong, because if you can sustain a women's rights movement, and that means you're not being put down, right? You are an autonomous women's rights movement. You can move forward so many different agenda items that include women and peace. If you do not have that, if you do not have the ability to coalesce, meet, organize, and prepare, your country meets far fewer peace indicators just across the board. And so when Laura and I were talking about this, she said, and I had not really known much about global grants, she said, what global grants do really well is they work in one country at a time and deeply, right? So what is the issue? How can you make sure that issue is very locally informed? It cannot be a prescription that comes from somewhere else. Global grants get it because we work with our host clubs and we work with them deeply, right? And we work with NGOs on the ground, the cooperating organizations there that really have the voice on what is happening for women's rights in Nepal. So we went ahead and we did a community needs assessment. So Every Woman Treaty, we work with national groups in 128 countries. And in Nepal, we have 5 different women's rights groups that we worked closely with, but none of them worked together. And so the first thing we did is we went to the 5 groups and we said, can we do a needs assessment? We'd like to do some in-depth interviewing of you about what is needed to increase women's safety in Nepal. And every single interview of the 30 we had, over and over again, said, we need a federation. We need to join together. We can't just talk about women's rights and menstruation huts and other things. We need to talk about violence against women together and advocate for it together. Because in Nepal, there are laws on the books that there was a new constitution created at the end of their civil war in 2006. And the laws in wording are very good. And because the laws in wording exist, the advocates don't really have anywhere to push. They just keep getting met with, well, that's already the law, but it is not being implemented. And they have no power. They are not successfully an autonomous women's rights movement. And so we said, well, what do you need to become that? Like, how would you coalesce? And immediately the answer, these interviews were wonderful. So much data on why they need a national federation and the capacity building they need. Because in women's rights organizing in Nepal, there's not the level of, we're not talking about, it's different from country to country. Let me back up and say, if you look at Pakistan, where we're doing a lot of organizing as well, a lot of very wealthy families will send their daughters off, who will then come back to run the NGOs, right? And so you're talking about like Western educated networkers, but who have never experienced the poverty. They've certainly experienced the violence. They haven't experienced all levels of society. In Nepal, the NGO workers have not had those benefits. And so you're running an organization based on an experience you've had in your life and limited organizing skills, sometimes not multilingual. And so advocacy in Nepal, whether you're speaking Nepali or you can actually advocate in English, which would get you some international funding, is a big deal. And so these organizations all said to us, we need training. We really, really need to come together. We need training. And we reached out to an organization called Global Health Advocacy Incubator, who they're the ones that brought the tobacco treaty forward. They've changed seatbelt and drowning laws in over 250 countries. And we said to them, how did you do this? On a country by country basis, how did you do this? And they said, we have a very proven formula. It is all about listening. It is about listening from the time we did those first community assessment interviews all the way through of what is needed. So we will provide, so we've engaged them to provide the training, and really what we've engaged is their process, right? Of how they pre-organize their scoping interviews, the things they need to know before they come in, the time we'll spend in the country doing a capacity building workshop. And then the follow-up is that these women's rights advocates, men and women who work on women's safety issues in Nepal, will need to go back to their jobs and families, and they won't have necessarily the funding or the time to implement all of this work. And so Global Health Advocacy Incubator worked with us to say we really need to have, we need to leave in place an infrastructure that supports the work of these individual advocates and organizations so they can legitimately form a federation, a women's rights federation that legitimately has a voice with the government. So while we're learning all these things, we're also talking through Laura to our host club in Nepal. And immediately the three men on our host club committee say, well, do you want to meet with this person in the United Nations? Do you want to meet with this person at the government? Who do you want to talk to? How can we make that happen? So that's where Rotary is so unique, right? And so we're over here talking to the women's rights advocates about how do we self-organize, right? And then we're over here saying, hearing Rotary say, we believe in this issue. We were a part of the process to put those laws on the books. We see those laws aren't implemented. And when this group is organized, we are ready to help them find places to use their voice. There's no other grant in the world that could do all of those things. So I feel really, really lucky to be working with the Rotary Club of Kathmandu, the Rotary Club of Newberg, and then all of the many Rotary clubs that have gotten involved in funding the grant. So the training, part of a Rotary Global Grant is that you're using a proven strategy. And the proven strategy we're using is working with this training organization, Global Health Advocacy Incubator, to do this capacity building training. The grant itself doesn't mention the treaty. The treaty isn't the outcome of the grant. The outcome of the grant is what do women's rights advocates in Nepal need to do to self-organize so that Nepal can create systems, safety systems that actually work. Do we want Nepal at the table when the treaty is proposed? Absolutely. In 2007, there was the Disability Treaty, which some of you may know of. And their slogan was, nothing about us without us. So when we look at this treaty and we think, right now there's several governments who are ready to propose it at the United Nations, Norway, Sweden, Canada. We think, no, we're not ready. And the reason we're not ready is because countries with a bigger gulf in human rights for women need to be at the table. Nothing about us without us. This cannot be informed by Western interests and then never implemented by national governments. This needs to be important and proposed by the government of Nepal. And our strategy goes beyond Nepal. We've already implemented our community needs assessment in Nigeria, Pakistan, and Kenya. We also implemented a community needs assessment for Rotary Grant in Fiji and really found out that this wasn't the right collaborative opportunity for that group. And that's where Rotary needs assessments are really great tools. So we will explore, now that we have the Nepal grant funded, what is the status of the Nepal grant? It is that we have submitted the grant. We have raised $35,000 from clubs like yours. We achieved the district match, which is also $35,000. And then ending this year, but we will still get it because we were in this process already. Rotary International matches at 1.5. So 35 clubs, 35 districts, and $52,500 from Rotary International. Starting next year, it's my understanding that it'll be 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. And so we have everything submitted. We have all the signatures from our district, and we have a final budget meeting with the head of the district in Nepal on Friday to answer final questions and get the final sign off from the Rotary district in Nepal. And then the grant will be submitted. We have selected training dates. Our original training dates were September, which we already moved back, and we've secured dates with our trainers, our in-country partners, and our host club for the first week in December. I personally think that we probably won't be ready then, not the grant, but the globe in terms of traveling and safety with the pandemic. My guess is that it'll get moved back into the spring of 2021, but we do have training dates secured and participants and trainers on board. So as soon as we hear that we have final approval, we'll be ready to begin implementation. We have, I think, 8 minutes left before I need to hand the reins back over to Tammy, but I really, jump in and tell me if that's not the right amount of time, because I really did want to have a chance to answer your questions. This is a lot of information and things that I haven't covered well. I would love to be able to clarify them.
Are you ready to take questions now, Erin?
Yes.
Okay, club members, if you'll either put your physical hand in the air so we can see you, or your virtual hand in the participants box, we will call on you and you can pose your questions to our presenter. Anyone with a question? I'm not seeing any hands up in the virtual box or in anybody physically raising their hand. Am I missing you? Keep waving if I'm missing you. Okay, I don't see any questions for Erin at this time. Erin, do you have any last, Renee, were you waving your hand to speak, or? Oh, I see the Benars. Okay, please go. Dale will unmute you.
All right, go right ahead.
Hi, Erin, thank you so much for this information. It is, it's really exciting to me to see this global approach to a women's treaty. That's just amazing. And after having traveled in India and Africa and places like that, where obviously there's a big need, I'm curious if beyond, I like the approach in Nepal of kind of empowering the women to be educated, be able to advocate for themselves. Do you know if that model is kind of being transferred to some of these other countries too, some of these other areas that we know there's a big need?
So what we've targeted in terms of working with Rotary clubs and exploring the Rotary global grants, which again, wouldn't be the right fit everywhere, but we're looking at countries we have really strong signaling from the countries that they would like to be involved in the treaty, but they're not organized in the same way that they would have enough of a voice or participation. And so Nepal was a perfect example because we have a Rotary Club in Oregon and a Rotary Club in Kathmandu that already had this very deep relationship. So we knew how to work together, because peace area focused grants, systems change grants, very complicated, right? And so we knew from the beginning it wasn't going to be the same kind of water and sanitation, how many supplies and what types, right? This was going to have to be a real partnership. And my counterparts in Nepal, the men who were on my committee at the host club, they needed to believe in this. It wasn't going to work if this wasn't important to them, because this isn't something that you can engage in very easily unless you feel it's important. And so we've been very lucky. One of our committee members is a member of the United Nations Development Program in Nepal, which has helped with technical explanations a lot to the members of the club. The next grant, Nigeria, we have a staff member in Nigeria, and she is frequently invited to present to the Prime Minister. I mean, she's very involved in national. She's helped change laws in her country already. In Nigeria, when we did the interviews, it was 55 women. The first day we asked for interviews, 55 women. The leaders are so gregarious. They're so different from Nepal. but they are not coalesced. So will they need the same capacity building? They feel that they have, in Nepal, the identification of skills was very clear cut. If we can't speak to government officials, we do not understand political map. Like, how would you create a map to get from here to actually having our laws implemented? That's not an understood process, right? So in Nigeria, what we're hearing is confidence. People are ready to talk to the media. They're ready to talk to public officials, but they don't have that map either. They haven't, in Nigeria, there's 3 different forms of law. The regular law, the, on the books, constitutional law, penal law, and traditional law. And so depending on, one of them has marriage at 18, one of them has marriage at 15, and one of them has marriage at 12, right? So how do you even get on the same page about talking about those things? And so when we did this process in Nigeria, we said, okay, we want to hear what skills you think you need. And it might not be the same. The capacity building skills will not be the same from country to country. But what is it that will help you bring Nigeria to the table and have Nigeria actually ready to be engaged in this? Nigeria is hugely important to us because Nigeria works within the Africa bloc, and Nigeria wants the whole Africa bloc to be who proposes the treaty. So we're talking about doing some really high level organizing, getting women's rights. There's 6 conflict zones in Nigeria. There's actual civil war going on. There's pastoral wars going on. There's so many different things that that it's difficult. And so this organizing process will be different, but hugely important. Pakistan, the issues of violence against women are, as you might imagine, outrageous. The Rotary Club of Lahore Garrison, there was a board member when I was on the, when I worked with Rotarian Action Group for Peace, who is the peace chair at that Rotary Club. And I contacted Shahzad and I said, well, is this even possible in Pakistan? And he said, yes, this is possible, because the women's rights advocates were like, this isn't possible. We can't get the men engaged. But here we have like a largely male, very powerful Rotary Club saying, yes, let's talk about this. And so what will we decide to do in Pakistan? And will it even look the same? But Pakistan also needs a successful autonomous women's rights movement. So we're looking at only countries where we know they're ripe for change on this issue. Countries that have no indication of being ripe for change wouldn't be the right place to start.
Okay, thank you for that, Erin. Thank you, Linda, for that question. Marilyn and Ron, I see that your virtual hands are up, and I see a physical hand from Tim Cowan. Tim, you'll be 3rd in the queue. It will depend on the length of the responses for these next 2 questions. Marilyn, you were first.
Well, my question is, in addition to the capacity building, do you have model laws that you're also making available to different countries?
We have created what we call draft 0 of the treaty, and the draft 0 has model laws. And so again, we know as an NGO, we aren't who proposes what the treaty will actually look like, but we have spent an enormous amount of time and very inclusive conversations with people from across the globe to make sure that we, if anybody asks, we're ready.
Thanks, Marilyn. Ron Kellerman, you're next.
Thank you, Erin. Your depth of knowledge and your breadth of knowledge and your commitment is very impressive. Thanks so much. My question is, Nepal has huge geographical challenges. Unlike many other countries, there are thousands and thousands of villages that don't even have a road, let alone phone lines or anything like that. How, you must need thousands and thousands of women to go to the hinterlands there to do the work. How are you going to implement this in such a geographically challenged country?
The way that we looked at it is we have 5 national partners in Nepal. Most are based out of, they're all based out of Kathmandu, not all proper, but within the region. But they all have really strong infrastructures that work with the village systems. And so part of this is a very expensive grant, right? And part of the outcome of the grant is to have a coordinator. And 1 year, we have 12 months And we have a very strong violence prevention education program that these 5 organizations that have national reach will roll out through their village programs. Because it's that absolutely tough. If it's nothing about us without us, it can't just be the upper echelons of Nepal that understand is what's needed. It needs to come down to the village level where violence is needing to be stopped.
Great, thanks for that question, Ron, and thank you, Erin. Tim, we have time for your question. Tim Cowan. Dale Pinn will get you off mute, Tim. There you go.
Erin, if the public knew about the work that you and Rotary are doing, how would it affect the polarization of our country right now?
You know, Rotary has we have as Rotarians, Rotary clubs, and Rotary as a whole, we have a voice that we need to use more effectively. There's, you know, the top 2 in terms of police brutality: race, gender. The sexual violence that happens in routine police encounters is outrageous. So I think that the first step is getting this last district official in Nepal to sign this grant, rolling this grant out, and giving Rotary a platform to talk about doing this work. And this work that we do in Nepal, we're already starting it in places like Canada and Fiji, where we don't need the very expensive infrastructure. We need to provide to our national coalitions there some of the pieces. And we really, I'm counting on Rotary being with us at this table.
Great, thank you, Tim, for the question. Thank you, Erin. Let's all thank Erin for her great presentation today. Thank you, Erin. We really appreciate hearing from you. Thank you so much. Now, before we close, I want to be sure and acknowledge again our guest, Jill Tucker from South Salem, my fellow president this year, Mary Way, past president of our club, joining us from Bend, and also Dylan, guest of Mark Wolf. So thank you all for being with us today. We really enjoy seeing your faces and welcome your participation. Remember that we have a Rotary International virtual conference coming up. The link is in the chat box. And then also, if you are on Facebook, there are Rotary International nearly daily updates coming from Rotary International. So if you have any interest in seeing those, just look up Rotary International on Facebook. Next week's program will be led, our program chair will be our President-elect Sue Blue, and the program will be Salem Health Director Cheryl Wolf. So we'll get an update from what's happening from their perspective from Salem Health. I know that it will be interesting and engaging, so I look forward to seeing all of you. Please remember to contact Chuck regarding your dues. And I don't believe I've left anything out, but if I see somebody's hand waving vigorously, I will pause. Seeing none, hearing none. Thank you all for being here. Blessings for the week. Love you all. Look forward to seeing you all in person very soon, I hope. So take care. God bless. We are adjourned.